Okay, so we're at the hour. Uh, Welcome everybody. Our welcome to our cultivating caution series. This is why is agriculture safety so important? I felt that we're creating a whole series on ag safety, and it was important to start such a series by going back into the past. I'm your host today. My name is Salah Isa. I am an assistant professor in the Ag and Biological Engineering department. I'm one of two faculty focused on agricultural safety and health topics. And I'll have a really great guest speaker, Bob Ahern, and I'm going to introduce him later on. I'm just going to set the framework for everybody before we get started. So, you look at the latest reports by Bureau of Labor Statistics here in the U.S. on agricultural related injuries, and you see we're doing better. We have about 400 fatal injuries last year. Compared that to the 1990s, we were experiencing the early 1990s somewhere between 800 to 900 fatal injuries per year. So that sounds good. That sounds uh, positive. But when you start taking into account the size of our workforce, right? We're a much smaller workforce than construction or transportation. We quickly realize that agriculture is, by rate, it is the most dangerous industry currently here in the U.S. So we are on average, or this year or last year was about 19 fatal injuries per 100,000 workers. Uh, and that has been typical throughout the last 2 decades. We've been averaging around 20 fatal incidents per 100,000, and that's why we spent so much time focusing on this, because we have such a small workforce. That each fatality is really crucial, really impactful to us, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar series. Now, agriculture is very different from any other industry. See, manufacturing, mining, transportation, or even construction. The majority of the farms, when it comes to agriculture, are small family-run businesses. So here you have two maps. One shows you the percentage, the small family farms as a percentage of total farms. And you can see in the US overall, around 88% of all farms are small family farms. And they're spread out really all over the US. When we look at mid-size family farms, that's another 5%. You can see they're a bit more concentrated in the Midwest. And that makes sense given that we have a lot of grain production occurring in the Midwest. And so these farms, we're talking about under $1 million in total gross cash farm income, and that's one aspect that makes agriculture very different. It's so scattered, so distributed, and it's run majorly by family businesses. And we take that and we zoom in into family workers, right? You look over the last 50 years and you could see that the number of family farm workers needed to maintain these farms has shrunk tremendously from you could say about 8 million in the 1950s to now around 2 million in the 2000s. Hired workers add another 1 to 2 million of extra labor on top of that. So our workforce is really small. We account only for about 1.3% of the total workforce in the US. And then that workforce, that's, again, which makes sense, family farm, it's so diverse. We have children, we have young workers are just starting and learning how to hold a job. We have a lot of workers above 65 years old as well. That is a very unique set of circumstances in comparison to other industries. Now, when we look at the hired worker portions of agricultural workers, Over half of them, around 50-60%, are foreign born. And a lot of times, as foreign born, English is not their primary language. It's Spanish, or even actually a lot more diverse set of languages coming as well. And given that becomes another hurdle in passing these safety messages. Is how do you to make sure that these messages that you're trying to take to the worker, how do you make sure it reaches out? To add another layer of complexity on this, if you think of manufacturing business, a worker there goes in, clocks in his shift, does the same job every single day and gets out. While a farmer, it varies every day. Some days he needs to be a mechanic, other days he needs to be an engineer. Some days a veterinarian, other days a businessman. And so it varies by day. And that becomes very hard to, in a sense, develop a safety plan that's just as comprehensive as what a farmer does. Given all these complexities and some historical reasons, agricultural tends to be underregulated in comparison to other industries. So that's a reflection of the challenges we mentioned earlier. And it's also a reflection of the history. And that's something we have to take in mind as we are developing safety programs for agricultural workers and families. Now, I have an excellent speaker with me today. He is Dr. Bob Beheron. He's a retired professor in the Ag and Biological Engineering department. He actually is the one who offered me his job later on. I very kind of him. Really enjoyed doing this, and he's excellent. He basically has been in this. He's been in this field for over 60 years. He knows the history of ag safety and health movement in and out. And Bob, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Salah. What Salah did was nicely say that I'm so old. I've been through much of the history of ag safety, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I did devote almost all my career in the ag safety area between the University of Minnesota and then my last 30 some years at the University of Illinois, leading our ag safety and health program. And so I've had an opportunity to kind of see a lot of things evolve over time in the field, and a lot of good things have happened, and we've had a lot of challenges and still have a lot of challenges as we go forward. What Dr. Isa asked me to do was to kind of give a bit of an overview of history, to give you a bit of a perspective of what's has been going on in the ag safety area, what we've developed in some significant areas. The history is fairly new as far as an industry focus. It's less than about 80 years. I mean, where there was any significant effort going on. There were some early things that were done a little before that, but not a lot. One of the early things that we could identify is that there was a publication written by USDA in 1918. Is the first written publication, formal publication that we were able to identify in the ag safety and health area, and I believe I'm pretty sure it focused on farm fires. So anyway, we go to the next one there. The first research thesis that did a formal study on ag safety issues was done in 1928 at Iowa State University. I believe they looked at some injury issues in Iowa in that particular study. The first national conference that focused on ag safety was in 1942. What was going on in the early 1940s? The World War II going on, and there was a real concern about the number of injuries and deaths that were occurring in the farm population, given the fact that there was a reasonable significant decrease in the number of farm workers because a lot of the young men had to go to war, and so they were very concerned about not having enough workforce to provide food for the country and for military efforts as well. And so in the 40s, President Roosevelt asked the National Safety Council to provide leadership in reducing farm accidents, and that's what precipitated the conference. And then they formed the Farm Division of the National Safety Council. That then turned into the Ag Division of Safety Council. I should take out that today. There actually today is in the National Safety Council is called an interest area within their business and industry division. And then in '44 was the establishment of the first National Farm Safety Week that was declared by President Roosevelt. This was an effort to put a primary emphasis on agricultural safety issues, again, during the war, to try to get people more concerned and more aware about the problem and start thinking about how to reduce the risk. And in some states, formed committees. Illinois, Nebraska, and Kansas had a group of ag specialists, extension specialists, and some farm organization leaders, ag safety leaders that started working on problems within their state, mainly developing educational programs and trying to identify the extent of the number of injuries, mostly more the extent of the deaths. Injuries were hard to identify and still are a challenge today, in fact. Some efforts things started really moving forward in the '40s, again, due to the big push by the president at that time. Some of the first national groups that were involved, and most of these are all still involved today. They are all involved today. The Farm Equipment Institute, which is now the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, Farm Bureau, the American Society of Ag Engineers back then, now it's the American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers today, and the Cooperative Extension Service, which is one of the primary educational efforts of the land-grant institution in each state. In 1942, USDA published the first review of farm and rural and home accidents to kind of get an idea of the extent of problems. This was a random samples kind of evaluation. Mostly they were looking at fatalities. Again, what injury data they had was very minimal, but it did give some insight as to what the problems were we were facing in the country. In 1943, the University of Wisconsin appointed or hired the very first farm safety person that was specialist that was hired to focus entirely on ag safety and health issues, and that was closely followed by Ohio, New York, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and hiring full-time people as well. We could go on, okay. And then in the 50s and 60s, the movement kind of expanded. There were approximately 20 states that had extension farm safety specialists and organizations like Farm Bureau who were focusing more on the ag safety area. These were individuals that were supported by the universities and their individual state. Their programs were financed by those efforts. In the 50s and 70s, the educational programs primarily became more extensive. The big focus on prevention was educating people about how to be safe and reduce the risk of injuries and deaths on farms. Then in the 70s, Congress appropriated funds for full-time extension safety specialists or expand existing programs. This is the funding program that where I got hired. I was at the University of Illinois working in campus safety and focused a little bit on our farm research safety issues. But I was hired by the University of Minnesota to be a full-time safety specialist based on these funds. And it really helped enhance, we believe within a year or two, 45 or 46 of the 50 states all had some significant effort going on in ag safety and health due to, the ones that weren't involved in the past was funded by this effort right here. And it was a grand amount of $20,000 per state that provided, that tells you my salary and for when I was at Minnesota and support funds for expenses and things of that nature. The primary organizations involved in the 70s were the Farm Division of the National Safety Council, the National Institute for Farm Safety. This was a new organization that started in the mid to late 60s, and their main purpose was to bring together those people working professionally in ag safety and health to provide in-service training to help them enhance their professional background in the ag safety and health area, and also to some degree to focus on some major issues in ag safety as well. But there wasn't so much the national promotion of the issue as the training of the professionals. And the American Society of Ag Engineers continued to be more involved. particularly looking at standards, egg safety and health standards for the design of machinery and livestock production facilities, grain handling facilities, things of that nature. In the American Society of Ag Engineers, then set a goal in 1970 to reduce agricultural accidents by 50% by 1980. Now, this was a very aggressive goal, considering the organization really only was maybe directly involved in a small percentage of the ag safety efforts at that time, but they were hoping to promote and inspire others to focus more on ag safety and health so we could bring down the accident and the death rates that were happening at that time. Okay. One of the other things is that during this time in the 70s and partly late 60s, the slow-moving vehicle emblem came into being, and the ROPS standard was published. And the ROPS, of course, is rollover protective structures for tractors. The number one thing for deaths still is today in most states, and is definitely nationally, is deaths by tractor overturns. And all those deaths are 90-some% are from tractors that do not have any kind of rollover protective structure on them. The slow-moving vehicle emblem was the first formal introduction, was done at a conference in our seminar at the University of Iowa in '62. Actually, the emblem was developed by an individual at Iowa State, but also another individual who was heavily involved that I knew personally was a guy by the name of Pat Asper. He was with State Farm Insurance and had a strong ag background interest. And then they established an actual standard within the American Society of Ag Engineers voluntary standards or industry standards that required emblems to be how it should be designed, shape, the color, size, and that sort of thing, which pretty much, at least the shape and size are still the same today as it was back then. We have done some things to improve the material, the reflective material and color of the emblem that lasts longer and is more visible. But anyway, this was an effort to try to get slow-moving vehicle emblems on all farm equipment that are going to be operating on public roadways. It was definitely in the standard. The American Society of Ag Engineering standards is primarily focused on new equipment that's being manufactured. So all new equipment that came out that was going to potentially be operated on public roads had the emblem on it or available to put on it when it was sold. Then many states really started adopting it as part of their regulations for movement of for operating vehicles on public roadways, and I think, in fact, I know every state in the country has some type of regulation requiring slow-moving vehicle emblems on farm equipment that move on public roadways. The tractor overturn prevention became a focus in the actually started in late 60s. Primarily in the late 60s, I think it was around 65 to 67 time period, John Deere developed a rollover protective structure. And they, in their testing and evaluation, and there was some also independent testing done at the University of Nebraska, tractor laboratory safety research, not safety, but research laboratory. We looked at a lot of things, not just safety. But anyway, they found it to be extremely effective in preventing crushing-related fatalities and deaths that occurred when a tractor overturned. And John Deere gave the patent. They had the patent on the roller protective structure, and they gave it to all the manufacturers in the United States and even some of the foreign manufacturers, so they could start installing these on their new equipment. And in 1976, OSHA approved the first standard for agriculture. This was the roller protective structure standard. What it said was that if you were an employer and farm employer, and you hired farm employees, you were required to have a rollover protective structure on that tractor if it was manufactured after 1976. And so that started getting, ROPS. ROPS was an option when you went and bought a tractor at that time, and so a farmer could buy with or without a ROPS, and so they had to get ROPS on new tractors if their employees were going to operate them and be within the law. There was a gaps here, of course. It wasn't being required on all new tractors. There was an effort to promote it to farmers to voluntarily put it on their tractors. They had their ROPS, even, and of course, even today, that most tractors, old tractors, can be equipped or retrofitted with the rollover protective structures, except maybe some of the really old ones that were manufactured in the 40s and early 50s. So this was a big step forward and one of the most effective means of preventing deaths, and still is today, that's available from a safety standpoint in agriculture. In the early 80s, it brought some disappointment. In 1980, the death rate for agriculture moved up as the most hazardous industry in the United States. Prior to that, back in the 60s, we were third behind. Agricultural industry was third behind the mining and construction industry, with about around 60 deaths per 100,000 workers between 60 and 65. At that time, mining had 123 deaths per 100,000 workers, and construction had about 75 deaths per 100,000 workers. And by 1985, agriculture's death rate dropped to about 50 deaths per 100,000 workers, but the mining industry dropped from 123 deaths per 100,000 workers to about 50, and construction dropped all the way from 75 to 45 deaths per 100,000 workers. And so what happened with those other industries? Well, the two major things was that unions got more involved in their heavily unionized industries, and they got more involved in requiring safety standards in their contracts with employers. And secondly, the mining safety standard was implemented, and the construction safety standard was implemented by the U.S. Department of Labor. So they started focusing specifically on those industries, and they had people inspecting those industries to make sure they were complying with the standards. And the unions and the new standards really were the main two factors in dropping the death rates in those industries. In agriculture, it was more educational, prevention, voluntary type of reduction. But one of the other things is that ASAB in 1980 evaluated how well their goal of reducing the death rates in the United States in agriculture by 50%, and found that the death rate had only reduced by about 8%. So their impact was very minimal, but I was involved in evaluating this at that time. But the reason, of course, was that I don't know why they didn't see it in the 70s when they made the initial, that was too lofty of a goal. It was honorable that they wanted to try to do that, but the American Society of Ag Engineers mainly focuses on, as I've already mentioned, development of new standards. They had a minimal impact on new regulations on education of farmers and farm employers about implementing management practices that would reduce risk and all those sorts of things. So they had a minimal impact on a lot of the other areas, and so you couldn't really expect it to be that 50% reduction. But they learned from that, and they did have some reduction. In the 70s, the ag fatality rate improved. As I mentioned, it dropped down about 40. In the 70s, it was around. Let's look here, about 60 deaths per 100,000 workers, and then in the 80s, it dropped down to about 50 deaths per 100,000 workers in upper 40s, and around 50 to 45 deaths per 100,000 workers. The other thing was that USDA, there was a lot of efforts to try to get USDA to increase the support for extension safety specialists. That $20,000 didn't increase, and some states weren't willing to put more money into it themselves. Some were, of course, but and so a lot of states dropped the position to half, or reduced altogether, or reduced it to half time. A few states went back to having just committees working on ag safety and health. So the effort within particularly the land grant institutions dropped off significantly. The National Safety Council also reduced their professional staff from 3 positions to 1. This was a big impact because they were primarily focused on a national promotion of ag safety and health issues, and also providing the collecting the statistics nationally on ag safety and health efforts, or what the rates were. And so that was diminished somewhat. And that was a negative impact on our efforts at that time. Okay, the last half of the 80s brought some optimism. Several things happened. The National Traumatic Occupational Fatality Database was formed. This was an effort to collect fatalities among all industries, including agriculture. But I will point out that that was focused mostly in agriculture and the other industries as well on employees. It did not include the farm operator, their children, what have you. So it's really was a small portion, 25 to 30% at the most, of the actual workforce that was being evaluated. It identified the ag workforce as having a death rate 3 times the national average based on that data sources alone. During this time, a new new organization and a national effort was formed called Farm Safety for Just Kids. It was launched by a farm mother who had lost her son in a gravity flow wagon, and suffocated in a gravity flow wagon. And she wanted to make an impact. And she got involved, several of us in the eggs that were involved in egg safety, met with her, she met with us and talked about different things that could be done, but she became a real national advocate for egg safety. She went and I guess you would say lobbied before Congress and helped get some additional funding, particularly for research and educational programs in the egg safety area. And she formed chapters. Started initially, she was from Iowa. It started in Iowa and then spread through the Midwest and around the whole country and even into Canada and some other countries as a community-based safety program to promote egg safety among children on farms, because the death rate among children was becoming more and more significant because being more mechanized and the fact that farm families, a high percentage live on farms, and the exposure was significant. And so they did a lot to try to get the rates, getting the rates down voluntarily by grassroots efforts. In 1985, ASA developed a ROPS standard that the ROPS standard they had became required for all new tractors. They decided that it was so effective in reducing deaths that they needed to not allow for manufacturers to no longer sell tractors that did not have a roller protective structure on it. Again, this was a voluntary standard. Not all the manufacturers had to do it, but pretty much all the U.S. standard manufacturers did do it. A few non-U.S. manufacturers did. Selling tractors in the U.S. didn't do it, but they opened themselves up to extreme liability, because if a tractor overturned, it was manufactured at this date. They had very weak grounds to stand on for why they didn't manufacture the tractor with the ROPS. And in 1988, the American Society of Ag Engineers president appointed a safety study committee to examine the society's role in ag safety, and they primarily recognized the need to really promote standards and develop standards that had a significant impact on reducing injury and death rates among the ag industry, particularly for new products. They also led some efforts for used products as well, particularly for the retrofitting of ROPS on tractors. We can move on. Yeah, okay. In the 90s, brought some new funding. Congress appropriated a little over $11 million for research and surveillance work and interventions in the ag safety and health area. And it was increased another year by over nearly half. It's $18 million. A good portion of this was focused on research, but also on outreach and trying to understand more of the root causes of agricultural injuries and what kind of education or policy issues could be possibly implemented and be accepted in the ag industry to help bring down the high injury and death rates in the industry itself. It funded several research centers around the country, mostly geographically located in different areas. In '91, the U.S. Surgeon General sponsored a national conference on ag safety and health. This brought together researchers, policymakers, educators. It was a 3-day period, three different conferences held within a short period of time, looking at these major areas of education, research, and policies. It began to really provide a national focus on ag safety and health issues, and brought in a lot, because of the funding, brought in a lot of other people in the ag industry who were qualified to help do research and develop effective intervention programs and try to get a better understanding of how to address the problem more effectively. In '91, same year, the Kellogg Foundation provided some of the first significant funding, as a private organization, to support community-based programs. Kellogg is an organization that highly focuses on grassroots educational programs, and they felt that they could maybe help have an impact on the egg safety area by getting the communities more engaged, the egg communities themselves, in the egg safety and health efforts. At that time, I was the egg safety program leader at the University of Illinois. We got one of 10 grants that they provided for projects that utilizes $3 million. And we mainly developed leadership programs. I think it was in about 6 or 7 counties as a way of evaluating the impact of that. And our efforts found that we could have some significant impact if we had leaders in the community that really focused on egg safety and health issues and led the efforts in their communities, or helped lead the efforts anyway. In 1996, Congress appropriated $5 million per year for 5 years to address childhood injuries. It was modeled after what was done for the general industry in 1991, and they funded a research and outreach center, national center at the National Farm Medicine Center at Marshfield, Wisconsin, and they then provided grants to a number of states to try to develop grassroots programs that focused primarily, and some was on research, but on how to be effective in reducing childhood injuries. And part of that was I was involved in one of the major studies. It was to develop age-appropriate tasks for children on farms. We had child development experts, extension educators, farm educators that were involved in trying to develop effective, appropriate, age-appropriate tasks for children to give a basis for farm families and farm operators and employers to make decisions about and guide them on what was appropriate for children to do, what age they should be thinking about operating tractors to operating powered equipment and so on and so forth. There was also a major at this time a study on lighting marking farm equipment completed at Ohio State University that provided the basis for the lighting and marking you see on farm equipment today. And this was started and was implemented a great deal. There's been improvements over time by the American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers, and many states appropriated laws and regulations that follow what the recommendations were under the study. Almost every state required, a slow-moving vehicle emblem that on all farm equipment that and provide the basis for determining when you need to replace the emblems and improve design of the emblem, mainly on quality and reflective ability. And they also provided, the study showed the importance of retroreflective marking and fluorescent marking on the extremities of farm equipment and the size of farm equipment to enhance visibility. Not just relying on the lighting, and also looked at location and improvement of lighting on farm equipment. So much of what you see on new farm equipment today in the last 30 years came from that study, and it was a fairly involved study. And the new millennium, again in the 2000 time period, they started looking at past and present issues. There was a conference that was held in 2001. Dr. Petrie, who worked with me at the University of Illinois, who actually was the one that organized this conference and provided part of the leadership of it anyway. They looked at what happened in the past that was working and what wasn't working, and tried to make some recommendations for what we needed to focus on in the future. And there was a major report provided after that helped guide a lot of the policy and research and educational focuses from that time period on. In 2003, the AgriSafe network was formed. It was mainly focused on rural nurses, on building their competencies in health and safety. That program is still funded and going on today. It's grown quite a bit. And they also have expanded their education training to the general farm population and to professionals working in the farm population. In this time period in 2000, around 2010 or so, 11, there was a major focus on grain safety. We were at the University of Illinois. We're heavily involved with a project, and we formed the Grain Safety Handling Task Force. That was it was initially a regional task force, and then now it's somewhat a national task force focused on developing effective training programs and procedures and policies as far as safe handling and working with grain, both within the farm area of the industry and in the grain handling industry, part of the industry. The grain handling industry is heavily under OSHA regulations, and so there was a big need to provide guidance and direction in that area. There's been in the most recent times, about the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a big new initiative in the ag mental health, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which is the research and training arm of the federal government, as opposed to OSHA's regulation arm, and has been funded to. There's been about 4 or 5 national centers focused on ag safety and health, multi-state centers. The University of Illinois leads one of those centers, an 8-state group that is focusing on providing resources, training, and some research on ag mental health to help farmers understand and provide them the resources they need to reduce the stress and so forth that's involved in agriculture that leads to many of our accidents that happen.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was really well placed and put. The history that you provided, it highlights how far we've gone and really where still we need to go. So just going on this quickly, I'm just going to share some of data on the cost of these injuries, the type of some of the type of injuries that we are reporting and we're focused on, and then also the impact on special populations. Now, this is just a very quick summaries on areas. I'm hoping with this series that we've just established that I'll be able to delve into each of these areas and really highlight the engineering, the education, and the enforcement components that are being in play in each of these areas. So very quickly, so cost of an agricultural injury, this is based on just worker compensation claims. A temporary disability, it's about $20,000. If you end up with a permanent disability, in terms of claims, that's about $140,000. And if there's a death, there's the compensation claims reach around basically $500,000. So just to give you some quick ideas, but we'll expand in future talks on this. One major area is disease and illness. Zoonotics is a very hot topic. You look at the map there, you can see all of the different zoonotic disease events that have emerged across the globe. This is not basically diseases just coming from one part of the globe to the other. This is happening everywhere. And this is a big concern that we need to address. And actually, on February 20th, we're going to focus on illness prevention for some of these. One thing to note, you can see about 24% of illness prevalence is due to respiratory conditions. And that does include actually infectious disease agents as well as part of that component. Another big hot topic is grain entrapments. So we, last year, actually, we had the most amount or 2022, the last available data, we had the largest amount of grain entrapments occur in the U.S. since 2010. So this remains a hot topic, even though we've invested millions of dollars for the last 10, 15 years into this topic. This is cases that we keep seeing, we keep documenting, and we keep trying to work on improving them. And they're 100% preventable, which is why this is such an important topic. For 22 specifically, around a third of these cases were fatal, which is good. Historically, about 70% were fatal. Around half of these occurred on farms. The other half were in commercial facilities like grain elevators or other grain handling facilities. That's a really important statistic because a lot of times people think that they're only occurring on farms or only issues with grain elevators. And also, from all of our grain entrapment data, around 20% of them occur to either children or young adults or are elderly. Now, historically, this was about 50%. So we're making progress, but we shouldn't be seeing as many cases here. Another big hot topic that we'll cover in June is heat stress. Currently, on average, agriculture worker is exposed to 21 working days in the summer. That is unsafe due to heat, and this is it's an ongoing concern that we really need to work and address. That jumping on our special populations, youth are one of the we see a lot of injuries in agriculture for our youth. So if you look at our data here, you can see injuries are occurring under the age of 16, 16 to 17, and 18, 19. Something very unique compared to other industries that we have listed out here. But also, if you take that and you do it as a rate, you can see that agriculture tends to have one of the highest rates of youth injury compared to any other industry. That's a major concern that we're going to dedicate a whole webinar just to focus on. Another one is our ag workers. We have our agriculture workers, our hired workers, which a part of them are migrants, around 50%, as we mentioned earlier. We continue to see a significant amount of injury occurring to them. That will be a focus of topic actually in April. Last but not least, one of our big areas of concern is Illinois itself. That's where we're based. So here in Illinois, around 50% of all ag injuries is due to machinery. Roadway related is another significant part, and then we see grain entrapments. That's some years we see that spike, some years we don't. This is a 5-year average to give you a sense of how each one of these are. When you take it all together, around 42% of all the fatalities we experienced over a 20-year period was tractors. And then if you take into all farm machinery, including grain bins, you can see that's a big percentage of Illinois farm fatalities. From July, I'm going to do a special just focus on 2023. We're going to analyze that data together and see what to do. Now, I'm going to end at this. Ag is changing. Autonomous tech is in the fields already. Whether we have these modular units that could replace tractors and do all these different functions, whether we have in this picture, this is a FarmWise weeder, it's a mechanical weeder, or here in the right, this is a sprayer, it's autonomous sprayer. Ag is changing. So how do we stay safe in this changing circumstances? So we're going to cover this multiple times. Our first time is in May, where we're going to invite our Farm to the Future specialist to talk about how ag is changing. So just a couple reminders. We have a lot of seminars going throughout February. Please do subscribe and join to them. For our Cultivating Caution series, it's happening the third Tuesday in every month, with the exception of we had a late start here due to the weather conditions last week. So we have a whole series. We're talking from infectious diseases to grain entrapments to farm worker safety to how technology will shape agriculture. So we have a great series coming up all the way down to November. I can't thank enough our farmdoc sponsors. They make this happen. They help. They provide that funding needed to put out this great content. So really special thanks for them. Also special thanks for our educational partners who provide us some of the content and the data that we use in this analysis. So Extension, I'm half of my appointment is Extension, and that allows me to do all that surveillance work. Also, now's a great time. If you have any questions, please do post questions. We left around 10 minutes, just questions, conversations. A lot of you said other from in terms of when I was asking you where you're coming from. So yeah, you can also leave us comments about where you're coming from as well. That's great feedback. Okay, we're open, right? So while we're waiting for questions, well, let me ask you this. So you've had a whole career looking at ag safety. Where where do you think we need to focus next? Where is basically that next bullet solution that will reduce fertility rates by another 20-50%?
Well, the big issues has always been, as a general category, is agricultural machinery. We're heavily mechanized. The manufacturers are constantly working and focused on trying to develop safer and safer machines. But the issue with that, of course, is that generally they do such a good job producing these machines that they often last 20, 30 or more years. They're out in the workforce or in the industry. And so while any improvements in the safe design of the equipment, it takes quite a while to get that integrated very significantly in much of the industry itself. You just look at the roller protective structure. You have 40-some% of the deaths are still involve tractor overturns. These are older tractors, almost predominantly, that don't have a roller protective structure on. So it takes a while to integrate this into these kind of changes in the industry. Now we have autonomous machines. Of course, if you don't have any operator on it, they're not likely to get hurt. But you also got to worry about people getting run over or whatever when the machines guidance systems aren't properly functioning and all that sort of thing. But I think still the big focus will be for some time on improvement of the machinery and the issues of working with older equipment and trying to get adaptations of new technology on the older equipment is a challenge, in my view, to a great degree. We've had a hard time getting farmers to retrofit their old tractors with ROPS, even though we know how effective they are at preventing people being killed if the tractor overturns. And the reason a lot of that is because people don't think it's going to happen to them because they're operating a tractor. But that's kind of a fallacy. Our data has shown if you turn that tractor over once, your chance of survival isn't very high. And so if it doesn't have a ROPS on it. So I think machinery will still be be something that we have to maintain focus on. I think there's a continuing issue is with the large amount of grain that we handle and store. We've had some inroads, I think, in reducing the risk somewhat with education and regulations, both, but particularly for farms or ag businesses where employees are involved. But I think we still need to look at that and the whole issues of safe handling chemicals. That's an area that we've had in my feeling, we had some significant reductions in exposure because we don't broadcast chemicals like we used to. When I was growing up on the farm and in my younger years, it's more directly applied to where the need is on the crops and so forth. So we've done a lot to reduce the risk, but it's still there. We still need to keep focused on it because of toxicity issues. But
No, I appreciate that. I do agree with you. Like, there's a study that came out in mid 2010s, I believe, just looking at ROPS adoption, and even 40 years later, around 50% of tractors still did not have ROPS. So I agree with you. Also, I highlight the importance of addressing any safety issues early on with autonomous systems. Because once it's out there, this equipment is lasting, and it's hard to go back and retrain or redevelop or add safety features later on. Well,
right.
Any last thoughts, Bob?
No, I think this seminar should do a lot to help series in helping people understand the risk and give them an opportunity to think about it and their perspective. Over my many years working in this field, a lot that I learned was from farmers themselves, the things and farm workers, what they were dealing with, addressing, and helped me refocus to a great degree some of the things that we did focus on, and how we go about doing different things, and the importance of engaging the farm population and trying to understand the issues and how to effectively address the issues so that they don't have to experience serious injuries or deaths on their farms that can be devastating to a farm family, or farm workers and their family. So I think there's still a lot of challenges out there. We've made some great strides, but we're highly mechanized. We use a lot of chemicals, handle animals, and all those impose inherent risks themselves that takes a conscious effort to focus on reducing the risk. If we're managing the risk on our own farm, or as an industry, we look at how we can be more effective in implementing effective policies that make sense, and also developing better products and equipment as we move forward that reduce the risk to those working with those products and services.
Well, I thank you tremendously for your time, Bob. It was really nice having you here and listening to you on this. As a reminder for all our participants, we have a survey at the end. Please do take the time to complete this and comment. Comment to us on what you would like to see. Tell us what you'd like to see. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. This is helpful. We're starting this new series. The series is for you. Telling us how to upgrade it would be awesome. Also, let us know what industry you're coming from. Whether you're coming from financial services, academia, consultancy, nutrition, and so on. That would be really helpful.